Welcome back to the show, everyone. We have finally reached the summit of the mountain, the sharp end of the 2026 World Cup. It's episode 21, the quarterfinals are behind us, and the air is thick with history. But before we get into the joy and the heartbreak on the pitch, I think we have to pause and acknowledge a very sobering moment. Before the England versus Norway match, there was a deeply moving moment of silence for South Africa's Jayden Adams, who tragically passed away at just 25 years old, only weeks after competing in this very tournament.
It's absolutely heartbreaking to see a player at his physical peak, someone who just registered minutes on the biggest global stage, suddenly gone. The tributes across social media have been overwhelming, and you could see the sheer emotion on the faces of the players standing around that center circle. It puts everything we analyze into stark perspective.
It truly does, Nora. It reminds us that behind the crests and the colors, these are just young men living out their fleeting dreams. And speaking of fleeting dreams, we had to say goodbye to 4 incredible nations this week. Let's take it match by match, starting with France ending Morocco's resistance. It took an absolute stunner from Kylian Mbappé to finally break them. I remember when a single moment of individual brilliance was the only way to unlock a truly stubborn defense, and Mbappé delivered just that.
He had to, Dad, because Morocco's defensive structure was completely stifling the central channels. If you look at France's expected goals, their XG excluding penalties was hovering barely above 0.4 before that strike. Morocco was forcing them into low-probability shots from outside the box. But that's the thing with a player like Mbappé. He can turn a 0.05 probability shot into a top corner finish. Morocco executed their game plan perfectly, but math doesn't account for magic.
Magic is exactly what Spain had to rely on against Belgium, though it was a match defined as much by tragedy as by triumph. It was a brutal day for the Belgians. Captain Youri Tielemans injured in the warm-ups and scratched right before kickoff. And then, the crushing blow. Thibaut Courtois forced off with an injury before Mikel Merino headed in Spain's winning goal. Courtois is the kind of keeper who commands his box with an aura. Losing him felt like the air went right out of the stadium.
The data backs up that feeling entirely. Courtois has consistently saved over 1.5 expected goals on target per 90 minutes throughout this tournament. He bails out his defense when big chances are created against them. The moment he went off, Spain's midfielders started finding spaces they couldn't access before. Merino's late run wasn't tracked, and replacement goalkeeper Senne Lammens simply panicked. It was a massive swing in the win probability matrix.
A cruel game, indeed. Now, let's move to a team that seems to thrive on cruelty and grit. Argentina beat Switzerland 3-1 in extra time. Pablo Iglesias Mora wrote recently that Argentina's World Cup is built on suffering, and I couldn't agree more. They never make it easy on themselves. But my word, Julián Álvarez's strike to put them on top. It is a genuine goal of the tournament candidate. He sank a 10-man Switzerland after that bizarre VAR check that ended in Breel Embolo's red card. A mistaken identity check. Technology is supposed to clear things up, not plunge us into a bureaucratic nightmare on the pitch.
The Swiss were absolutely furious, and the social media trend analysis shows fans globally siding with them on the VAR delay. It completely broke the tempo. But let's talk about Álvarez for a second. His goals per 90 metrics are off the charts right now, but what's fascinating is his XG plus XA per 90. He's not just finishing, he's facilitating. That strike was pure instinct. But his underlying numbers show he's consistently getting into the right pockets of space. Switzerland dropping to 10 men just gave him the mathematical advantage he needed.
Well, speaking of mathematical advantages and sheer drama, we have to talk about England and Norway. 2-1 to England after extra time. Jude Bellingham, the big game player, steps up yet again with a show-stopping run, pouncing on a rebound to give them the lead. But Nora, the controversy, the Cablegate incident on England's equalizer when the ball supposedly touched a cable of the spidercam. Norway claims that goals should never have stood. And even Thomas Tuchel was shockingly cold after the match, saying, "We were lucky today." When asked about Tuchel's lack of praise, Bellingham just responded, "Whatever." The tension is palpable.
It's a fascinating dynamic. Tactically, let's deep dive into England because there's a huge disconnect between their results and their underlying metrics. John Stones and Mark Guehi did an incredible job keeping Erling Haaland quiet, limiting his shots on target per 90. But looking at England's possession, their big chances created are surprisingly low for a team in the semi-finals. They are over-relying on Bellingham's individual brilliance. If you look at England's expected goals and expected assists per 90, the systematic creation just isn't there. They are surviving on high-intensity actions. Their tackles per 90 and interceptions per 90 in the middle third are excellent, but they lack fluid progression.
And you can feel that lack of fluidity in the mood of the camp. You know, I remember when a manager and his star player being at odds would tear a dressing room apart. Tuchel and Bellingham need to cool this tension with England so close to history. Harry Kane came out today and accepted Tuchel's criticism, saying, "He just wants to see the best version of us." That is proper leadership from Kane, trying to bridge the gap between a rigid tactical manager and a generational free-spirited talent like Bellingham.
Exactly. Tuchel's system demands strict positional discipline, which suppresses organic expected assists from the wingers, forcing Bellingham to break the lines himself. It's a high-risk, high-reward strategy. If England wants to survive the next round, Tuchel has to either trust the analytics and open up the formation to increase their XG, or rely entirely on this chaotic, emotionally driven momentum.
And emotional momentum brings us perfectly to our legend of the game. With all this talk of midfield generals, I want to highlight a man who defined modern midfield orchestration, Luka Modrić. You know, I remember watching him glide across the pitch, dictating the tempo of a match with nothing but subtle shifts in his hips and those impossible outside-of-the-boot passes. He didn't need blazing speed. He just needed a yard of space and a vision that few players in history have ever possessed.
He's the ultimate outlier in football analytics. What made Modrić a unicorn was his stamina combined with his technical precision. Even deep into his 30s, his interceptions per 90 and his progressive carries remained elite. He consistently overperformed his expected assists because the passes he attempted were so mathematically improbable that defensive structures couldn't map them. He proved that you can have all the big data in the world, but if a player can process spatial geometry faster than the opposition, he will dominate.
Spatial geometry. Leave it to you to turn poetry into an equation, Nora. But one thing is for sure, he will be missed. Now let's step away from the pitch for a moment. What is happening in the wider world of this tournament?
Well, social media is absolutely ablaze right now, and not just because of Cablegate. Gianni Infantino is reportedly totally unfazed by recent criticism and is seriously dropping hints about expanding the World Cup to a 64-team format before the 2030 event. The timeline is flooded with fans debating if this ruins the prestige. And if that wasn't enough to make your wallet hurt, FIFA currently has nearly 1,200 tickets on sale for the World Cup final, priced at an eye-watering $7,380 each.
Good heavens! $7,380 for a single match and 64 teams. Jonathan Wilson wrote a brilliant piece today titled, "Football without faith is nothing, so Infantino is playing with fire." I have to agree. The beauty of the World Cup is its exclusivity, the fact that only the absolute elite gather to clash for the ultimate prize. Watering it down to 64 teams while charging families the price of a small car to sit in the upper tiers. It risks alienating the very working-class roots that built this beautiful game.
I hear the nostalgia, Dad, but from a purely logistical and developmental standpoint, a 64-team format creates a larger sample size of global talent. It funds grassroots infrastructure in developing confederations. But I'll concede the ticket prices are a glaring issue in accessibility. It changes the atmosphere in the stadium from a passionate, chanting crowd to a corporate networking event. The heat maps of crowd noise could look very different by the final.
I suppose we will have to see. But looking forward, the stakes couldn't be higher. The semifinals are set. We have France and Spain meeting in the semis for the second straight major tournament. The immovable object against the unstoppable passing machine. And then England versus Argentina. Oh, Nora, the history there. The ghosts of '86, of '98. It is going to be an absolute classic.
The analytical models are splitting right down the middle for both matchups. France's transition speed against Spain's high defensive line is a tactical dream, and England's physical defense trying to contain Alvarez's chaotic movement will dictate that second semifinal. I'll be refreshing my data feeds all week.
And I'll be watching the old tapes, preparing my heart for the drama. Thank you all for joining us for episode 21. We will be right back here after the semifinals to break down who will be playing for the ultimate prize. Until then, keep loving the beautiful game.
And keep an eye on those underlying stats. Goodbye, everyone.